Hi, my name is Andrew James, and I'm here to talk about two basic theories of cognitive learning. To begin, we're going to talk about the important parts of learning. Route learning is learning for memorization. It's short term. There's just retention and it's quick. Meaningful learning requires understanding and constructing knowledge and transfer to learning tasks that are more realistic. Multimedia learning is what we're going to be focused on. That is learning from pictures and words, and it's more effective than just individually words or pictures. The cognitive load theory explains how humans think, and it's based on the cognitive architecture and the load conditions. Okay? It uses this cognitive architecture of humans and describes any issues we have with working memory. Basically, it helps us decipher secondary knowledge, such as reading and writing, instead of primary knowledge, such as speaking. The architecture is based on the working memory, which is short term, and it can hold about 5 to 9 items within about 20 seconds. The human cognitive process uses 4 different types of memory. The human cognitive process uses 3 types of memory. There's the sensory memory, which is your senses. There's the working memory, which is limited, and it's where all the learning happens. You select and organize the information and use it with prior knowledge. Last, the long-term memory is the unlimited storage. Now, schemas are the organizational structures that help organize what we've learned, so that helps us bridge the gap between working and long-term memory. The cognitive load principles starts with the information store. It basically states that memory is unlimited in the long-term memory, and we can change it pretty much no matter what. Borrowing and reorganizing principle just says that we can learn from others in storing. The randomness as genesis principle basically states that if we don't understand something, we can take trial and error and try to figure it out. The better your long-term memory is, the more likely you'll be able to problem solve a little bit quicker though. The narrow limits of change basically states that the working memory is short-term, and it helps us learn in the long run as long as we're able to select the relevant information. The environmental organizing and linking principle helps us learn when to use the correct information in the correct context. There are some basic terms to help us understand the mental loads that happen. The first is the intrinsic load. This depends on the learner, and what they know depends on how complex the problem is. So if there's too many elements and they don't understand it, then that's too much for them. If it's too few, they might be a little bit bored, but it's easy for them. The extraneous load is because of the way we present material might be confusing and not necessary for teaching. And the germane load is the most effective load because it's the effort you put in mentally, and it helps you learn. Overall, the goal is to use the appropriate amount of the intrinsic load, lessen the amount of the extraneous load, and to have the proper germane load for the proper way to learn. The next theory is the cognitive theory of multimedia learning. This all leads back to the multimedia learning theory that states that pictures and words together are more effective than words or pictures alone. To begin, we're going to talk about the 3 assumptions about this theory. The first theory is that we have a dual channel process that helps us process with our eyes and our ears, and you can take the representations and switch them. Like if you were talking about a cloud in a thunderstorm, you could picture it in your head. Next is the limited processing assumption. This is basically stating that the working memory is limited. The limited processing assumption is very much related to the narrow limits of change from the cognitive load theory. The active processing is the active thinking and cognitive processing. You have to select the information, organize it, and integrate the words and pictures to your memory. The processes begin by, like I said, selecting and paying attention to the key words or pictures and storing them in your working memory. Next, you take these things and you organize them and build connections to your prior knowledge. Lastly, both representations, the pictures and the words, have to be integrated together and mapped onto the other in like a mental model. Connections have to be built with both visual and verbal models for long-term memory to work. We also have some other terms: cognitive processing, extraneous processing, essential processing, and generative processing. The goals of the cognitive theory of multimedia learning is to reduce the extraneous cognitive load, manage the intrinsic load, and facilitate generative processing techniques that are effective for learning. To compare these two theories, they're both based on how humans learn and have developed over time. The cognitive theory of multimedia learning is a little bit more specific because it's talking specifically about words and pictures, and it gives a little bit more detail, but it still talks about working memory to long-term memory. Lastly, we have those terms we just talked about. Cognitive processing is the same as cognitive load theory. They're very close. Extraneous processing is the extraneous cognitive load. The essential processing is the intrinsic cognitive load. And the generative processing is basically the germane cognitive load. It's the mental effort of learning that makes the learning happen. Overall, just remember, as a teacher or an instructor, to try to reduce that extraneous load and find a nice balance for students.